I'm going to kick off first because I don't have a lot to share. I'm going to give you a bit of an update on the war in Ukraine. I don't have a report as such, but I do have some pictures to share with you and some funny contradictions I want to point out as well. The front lines haven't changed very much. If I show you the deep state map, there's just like a tiny bit of movement happening in the last week. And the reason for the stalemate is the weather's a bit shit and we're still getting organised for the counteroffensive, although the Ukrainians have said the counteroffensive has begun. And they said it wasn't going to be in one big giant place, in one big giant operation. They said it was going to be dispersed across a series of other places. But earlier in the week, we saw the Ukrainian pro-Russian version of their force driving American Humvees and MRAPs across the border into Russia and attacking the southern part of Belgorod, taking out some border guards and doing who knows what. It's all a ruse to pull the Russian military into defending the northern part of the Ukraine, to pull people away from what would be considered otherwise the front lines. But in reality, like, how much difference does that actually make? And they did say, the Ukrainians did say, not reported in mainstream media, but seen all pretty deeply on Telegram channels. And I think some of this is not reported in mainstream media because it's simply in the Ukrainian language. And there's just not enough people to decode that or decipher it and translate it into something that people in the West can understand. But the Telegram channels that I'm part of, I see that translation coming through, and they said this is just one of many attacks that's actually going to happen. The Americans came out and said, don't do that. Don't be attacking anybody like that. Don't go across the border and you're going to cause more trouble than it's worth. So the first piece of contradiction I want to share is the Americans said, don't go across the border in Russia and attack mainland Russia with troops. But then they said in the same breath, okay, if you need to go and prosecute the war that way, then you need to do what you need to do. We're not going to stop you. Like, which one is it, man? You know, are you on the bus or are you off the bus? That's how we used to say it in the military. On the bus, off the bus. Which one? Come on. Are we getting on? We get on, you're going to get off. We're going to wait on the bus for an hour. We're going to hurry up and wait like this. The next bit of contradiction I want to show you is this. So the biggest carrier, the newest carrier in the American fleet, the USS Gerald Ford, headed into Norway, into Oslo, and it parked up over there in that part of the world and is getting ready for a large exercise that's going to be going on in the next couple of weeks. And the Russians came out and said that that's like really super provocative and completely unnecessary. I'm like, man, my head's going to explode, man, with these idiots, man.
I mean, what are they going to say? Hey, welcome to the neighborhood. I mean, of course they're going to say that.
I don't know what they're going to say. I don't know what possible comment could come out of the Kremlin. I don't know, man, but my head blew up when I read that.
Yeah, it's a standard press release. You know, they don't write it. They just use the same one that was written before. Hey, but pull it out again. Yeah.
No, they took the one before, put it into ChatGPT and said, can you spin that another way? ChatGPT said, you know, that's a provocative act. You shouldn't do that. All right, man. So it was completely unnecessary and provocative to also invade another country. But, you know, just saying. Here's the next contradiction, right? We're getting ready for the counteroffensive. We're getting ready to actually go and take down the Russians and take back Crimea and take back the land. And the West is the victor and the man in Russia is the evil villain. And this guy here just retired. So thank God he's gone.
Thank God.
Yeah, he's pretty weak.
Don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out.
Yeah, literally, right. So he's the one responsible for the withdrawal in Afghanistan and that absolute debacle and the chaos of what's been going on in the US military. He's been responsible in overseeing it. So he's been replaced by an Air Force general who's a fighter pilot, which is probably timely given the potential conflict with China and given that, you know, this is not going to be a land war with China. It's going to be an Air Force fought war and also a naval battle as well. So maybe having an army guy at the top of the food chain there is not the right thing to do. So that is probably a pretty good move. But on the way out, he said something that was, you know, in my view, these people don't seem to understand like the amount of influence that they actually have, you know, because they're just so desensitized to what they do on a daily basis as it comes to the geopolitics of what it is that they're talking about. And he said something that was just a massive contradiction. I'll read it to you. Russia is not going to win the war on the battlefield. It's simply not possible, says Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley. At the same time, Milley warned that Ukraine is unlikely to expel the occupying forces from all its territories soon successfully. Ukraine's strategic goal of regaining all its territories does not look like it can be achieved militarily in the short term. On the bus, off the bus, man.
On the
Which
bus,
one?
I beat me to it.
Get the fuck out of here. Get off the bus, man. Just pick a course of action and stick with it. You're going to give them weapons. You're going to supply them until they win or not. Which one?
He's just got all his bases covered. He's anticipating those future interviews. No. See, I told you. I predicted. He's got all his bases covered for every scenario.
You're not just a stock market savant. You're a joint chiefs of staff savant.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'll tell you. I can tell you stories on that someday.
I'm sure you could. I'm sure you could. All right, I'm going to highlight the next contradiction. These two, in Australia, what you'd call these guys, these two wankers, or this is when I see this, whenever I see something like this is actually what I see in my mind. And you can replace Mark Milley and Lloyd Austin with B1 and B2, or Vladimir Putin and Lukashenko as B1 and B2 as well. But Putin signed a deal to move tactical nuclear weapons into Belarus, which is outside of the scope of the Nuclear Arms Non-Proliferation Treaty. So the Non-Proliferation Treaty came into force in 1970, and it's based on 3 pillars. You would have heard of this before. So the non-proliferation, disarmament, and peaceful use of nuclear energy. Under the NPT, the 5 recognised nuclear weapon states, so the US, Russia, UK, France, and China, are not allowed to transfer nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices to any recipient. Similarly, non-nuclear weapon states party to the NPT are prohibited from receiving such weapons. So essentially what that's saying is if you've got nukes, you can't give them to someone who doesn't have nukes. And if you don't have nukes and you know that somebody's going to give you nukes, you're not supposed to do that. So are Belarus a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty? I don't know. I didn't bother looking that deep because the contradiction resides in US nuclear weapons residing in Europe, in Turkey and in Italy. Like, come on, man. And why are you moving tactical nuclear weapons into Belarus when you've got hypersonic missiles that you could fire literally from anywhere in Russia, and that would be on the battlefield across the top of their target within minutes? It doesn't make any sense.
I don't know. How about plausible deniability?
Well, maybe there's a bit of that, but if I go back to something that seems unreal, it can't be this. Surely not. But this is the only thing that I can think of, right? Knowing Russian doctrine and the way that the Russians behave. Remember, the difference between the Russian military nuclear doctrine and our one is that they're planning to win a nuclear war. And so the way that they deployed during the Cold War their nuclear weapons was at a battalion level. So the battalion commander, so that's all the way down the food chain, the battalion commander had the nuclear weapons in the battalion, and they could fire the artillery rounds if they needed to. So back on our side, when we were worried during the Cold War that the Russians were going to come through the Fulda Gap in Germany, the only thing that we could stop their armoured brigades was actually looking through the binos and going, oh my God, they're coming. And they'd get on the phone and they'd pass it up and pass it up and pass it up and pass it up 10 times, and it'd come back down and go, all right, you can use the nuke. But by the time somebody had passed it back down, the Russian T-72s had rolled over the frontline troops, and that was the end of them, right? So that was the whole idea of having tactical nuclear weapons, because that would be the only thing to stop the armor in the open in Germany if the Russians were going to come through the Fulda Gap there, because that was the most plausible thing that was actually going to happen. But here we are now. We now know that during those times that the Russians had deployed nuclear weapons at that battalion level, and they had the ability to make the decision as to whether or not to use them. So that's a very, very scary proposition. And in this day and age of hypersonic weapons and the different weapons delivery systems that the Russians have, it just begs the question, are they maneuvering their forces to allow low-level battalion commanders to take charge of nuclear weapons in the event that that actually happens? And to your point, Ed, that could be also another form of plausible deniability where, well, the weapons were deployed, but, that guy fired it, but, we never authorized it.
Yeah.
But your doctrine says that it does. So, yeah.
We didn't mean it. Yeah.
Oops.
Oops. Yeah.
Sorry,
Oops.
sorry about that nuke. All right, here's another contradiction. This time from the Ukrainian side. All right, this is a screenshot of my Telegram channel, just from like, what's the time now? It's 5:22. It's 5:49 now. So from 20 or 30 minutes ago. So the top article says Russia attacked a clinic in Dnipro. Freedom footage from the scene of the shelling. So the video just above here, where the top of the screen is, it's footage of a hospital on fire. It doesn't look like a hospital, it looks like a clinic or something like that. Russian troops attacked city polyclinic of Dnipro. 2 people died from Russian missile. 23 victims are known by local authorities reported. And then so this is at 9:18 p.m. last night. I'd received that into my Telegram in this channel. This is the official Ukrainian channel. So here's the contradiction. Literally, so 9:34. So what's that? 16 minutes later, they put another post in there. It says, today Russia made an airstrike on Ukraine again, but the night strike did not reach its goal. In May alone, in Kyiv, Russians made over 12 drone attacks. So which one is it, man? Did they attack the hospital and the missile got through or not? Like, which one? On the bus? Off the bus? You can't decide. Maybe the hospital or the clinic that was attacked, that was the day before. So I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. But I can't give you the benefit of the doubt because you posted that thing within 16 minutes of each other. So you're contradicting yourself if you're fucking...
You know what we need. You know what we need. We both need to download the Dia app. That's what we need to do. And
that will tell us for sure, because somebody's on the ground going, "Oh, they bombed the hospital. The pregnancy clinic got blown up," or whatever. Like the local doctor is in trouble. He needs help. Like this. Yeah. All right, I'm going to highlight the last little contradiction here, and this is about the euros that are based in Russia. So the EU is discussing the transfer to Ukraine of profits from Russian assets, get this, worth 196.6 billion euros, which are frozen in Belgium in the settlement center, Euroclear, due to sanctions. So the sanctions went ahead. So this is the Financial Times reporting this, by the way. So the sanctions went ahead and they stopped everything. So stop all transactions, stop going back and forth, and there's $196 billion just sitting there.
Of Russian money.
Yeah, if they confiscate those assets, they confiscate those assets, never to be returned, and they just give them to the most corrupt government in all of Europe. I get that Russia need to pay reparations and they need to rebuild, they've destroyed the place. I get it. But you're giving them... Who would ever want to be in the SWIFT system?
Well, look, go ahead, finish your thought.
No, that is the end of my thought. Yep. Because who would want to be in the SWIFT system if you know that one day someone could just go and turn it off and then seize everything that's there?
Yeah, well, in a very real way, Vladimir Putin is hoping this happens, because he's going to weaponize that event. He's going to go to the rest of the world. See, you cannot trust these guys with your money. If they don't like you for whatever reason, they can steal your money, and you know what? He's right. They're true.
He's 100% right.
It's 100% right.
No doubt about that.
The world is looking at America and they say, "Yeah, we know that Putin did everything, but you just arbitrarily froze his money." That doesn't make me feel a whole lot confident that I'll park our country's money with you. So maybe we should look at this BRICS agreement after all. So
when they talk about in geopolitics, they talk about soft power and hard power. That's a version of non-military hard power, and seizing a country's assets and blowing up their pipelines and doing all things like that. That you can't think that that's not going to have massive consequences down the track. I've been listening to a new audiobook, maybe the best audiobook of the last 12 months. It's called The Art of Clear Thinking. It's written by a fellow named Hazard Lee, and so he was an F-16 and an F-35 pilot. He's still an F-35 pilot, and it took him 6 years to write this book, right? So when you hear the story of it, so I've been following him for a while. He's an awesome dude. I'm actually going to try and get him on the show. I reached out to him yesterday to see if he wanted to come on. So he's a fighter pilot, and he talks about the process of decisions, because flying a jet is relatively straightforward, but making the decisions is not. And one of the things he talks about is compound interest. And you and I know about compound interest because we talk about finance all the time. But for the people that out there that don't know, if I gave you a $1 and I said to you that coin doubled every day for the next 30 days, how much money would you have in 10 days' time? Well, not that much, surprisingly, because if you go 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512 in 10 days. $1 becomes 512. So there's an inflection point where that 512 becomes 1,028 or 1,024, then 2,000, then 4,000, and now it's starting to blow up. So at about day 20, you see this inflection point on that curve, this massive curve. He called it something specific that fighter pilots call. I can't remember what it is. I've got to go back and listen to that chapter again today because it was so poignant. And what he was talking about was when people are making decisions, they're unable to see where that inflection point actually is. And I think that's what is happening here, because for every decision that they make about these sanctions, and every time they go, all right, seize that asset, that looks like an asset that comes under the sanctions, seize it. They get this boat, they get this house, they get this bank account, they get all of these things that they're holding on to, which belonging to other people. They're seizing them, but they're not realizing that has an order of magnitude and a response that happens 5 or 10 or 50 times downstream from where they are today. And no one except a really sophisticated AI program to anticipate those results could actually understand what it is that they're doing and the implications of it today. Imagine if you were a legitimate Russian business and you were doing business like a normal person in the world. You had nothing to do with politics. You had nothing to do with anything that happened in the war in Ukraine. And suddenly you're on the receiving end of these sanctions, and $100 million of your assets were seized in Europe. And then they were seized to never come back. They seized your house. They seized all the things that you've done. You've done the right thing your whole life. You did all the right things. Imagine the ramification of that.
Yeah. These are not, circumstances that you cannot see, right? Coming. If America took a little bit of time to think through the other point of view, it's not that hard to extrapolate. Well, if we do this, other countries might look at us and say, you know what, we don't trust you with our money. It's not that hard. Open your eyes a little bit. How egotistical can you be? I mean, how?
What's the alternative, though, Ed?
What? Well, you start with honoring international law.
Yeah, but the reason that they sanction them is because what they're trying to do is use hard power to cause as much pain as possible to get them to comply and to capitulate. But the Russians are like, sanction all you want, I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit about the people that are dying in the war. I don't give a shit about Russian businesses. I don't care about anything, because the person that's in charge, it's not affecting them. And that's the reason why he just shrugs his shoulders and goes, whatever, I wish they'd done this years ago. Literally is what he said.
Well, you and I both recall that soon after we put sanctions on Russia after their invasion, Putin came out and said, I wish they had done this years ago. Right? Because Putin knew that it was going to force other countries into the
BRICS alliance and the other alliances. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What about when Obama lifted sanctions periodically against the Iranians? And there was the Iranians went, sweet, get that money out of the bank quickly. And they're like, righto, how much is it? To the tune of billions. And there's aeroplane loads of billions of dollars of physical cash flying into Tehran because these guys had their bank accounts unlocked, and they're like, get it out of there now, get it out of the SWIFT system and bring it home. So we've actually got it, and we can do something with this to move our country forward. So right now there's $196 billion, whatever it is. It's not a small amount of money, man. It's not like one person's wealth of $190 million, $196 billion. It's like assets of an entire nation, a nation state's assets and their businesses and all of these things that are there. And they're going to go, no, you can't have it back. You're never having it back. Bad luck. It's like, what?
See,
judge, man.
196 billion euros. Okay, so if you go by the math that they spent so far sending to Ukraine, we could fund their entire social security system, their entire economy for about 5 years just on that money.
Listen, mate, that's a stretch. It's probably about 2 years because there's a whole lot of people on the take.
That's right.
They're going to need 3 years worth of payments if you want that to go through.
Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
we're going to have to run it through the app.
Sure. There are middleman fees all along the way, right? They might end up with 10 billion.